All right. So I guess we are on, I guess. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. This is another truly international panel. I am Jean-Luc Gustave, head of Asia for GDA Capital, based in Hong Kong. And today it's my pleasure to be moderating this panel called Navigating the New World, Regulations and Public Policy. In a second, I will introduce our two very esteemed speakers, respectively Andy Kristen calling or speaking from Geneva, and Toufic. Where are you, Toufic, today?
Today I'm in Toronto, actually, but I'm usually based out of Montreal. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So maybe what we can do to kick it off. I mean, we all know how important this topic is. We also know how some people kind of dread it, or it looks a bit intimidating on most projects. Personally, being a lawyer by training myself, I noticed that sometimes this is the last thing project owners or startups want to actually talk about. But we all know it's so important. So maybe it would be interesting to because I know each of you personally, so I know how your respective backgrounds are very different, which I believe it kind of contributes to a very interesting conversation. So maybe you guys could start with maybe a few minutes each on who you are and what has been your path until now. So maybe Andy, can you start if you want to?
Sure. Happy to be featured on this panel with you, Jean-Luc, and you, Toufic. Nice to meet you, by the way. So my name is Andy Kristen. I'm one of the co-founders and the Chief Vision and Operations Officer at Litigation Capital. So my background is in science. I've hold a PhD in psychology. I did a lot of work in neuroscience, and then I switched to the startup environment. I took intense business courses and courses in finance. I consider myself as a continuous learner, right? And then I came to the topic of blockchain, and through blockchain, I created a few startups, and one of them is Litigation Capital. And this startup is very young still, so we launched the company like 9 months ago, and our token was launched like 6 months ago. So this is me in a very nutshell. I'm happy to tell more if need be later on.
It's quite amazing because just by hearing you, it's not the first time I'm hearing you describing your background, and again, the first question that always comes to my mind is how do you end up in this setting up, co-founding a litigation finance firm? But we'll come back. We'll come back to that later. Toufic, probably more classic path in this role.
Well, it depends. Classic is relative, I would say, because litigation finance is extremely interesting for sure. I would love to hear much more about it, and definitely a pain point. But yeah, I am classic in the sense that I am a lawyer that works in a law firm that provides legal services, but I'm unclassic in the way in which the law firm was started and what the law firm does, which is essentially, is a corporate and securities law and IP law firm for digital asset companies. So we started basically in 2017 as a sole practitioner working with crypto companies, and then we incorporated as a law firm in 2018. And we've been able to service clients really all over the world, not only in Canada and the United States, but we've been able to work through our European staff out of Europe and also assist in a lot of kind of offshore jurisdictions and what needs to happen there. So yeah, classic in the sense that I'm a lawyer, but unclassic in the sense that we're working with digital assets here, so I don't know how classic it can be.
Yeah, you're totally cutting edge, right? That's it.
Yeah, and actually that's very interesting. And being in Asia, obviously, I'm following closely the regulatory landscapes in places where I usually operate. So Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and I have to say that it's actually even for lawyers, it's actually not that common. Basically, whenever we have a project asking us for a good digital asset lawyer or a good blockchain lawyer, if even, I mean, let's say that exists, a good blockchain lawyer, it's not that easy to find a good practitioner or someone who is actually well versed in this topic, because obviously it's a constantly changing topic. Regulation is everywhere, from who you can sell to what you actually own, especially in an age where we live in all those projects are basically aiming at dislocating what we usually call property to where you can sell to KYC and AML risk. So basically, regulation goes hand to hand with mass adoption, which is what the entire industry is after. I remember a few years back, I think it was JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs. I think it was JP Morgan. For the first time, one of the highest salary of the bank was the head of compliance global, and that came as a shock for the industry, because that was the first time we saw that. So it just signaled a very interesting evolution in the industry. But I mean, basically, after your respective presentation, I mean, one question maybe for you, Toufic: how do you work with people like Andy? So those guys come to you, they have an amazing project, Litigation Finance. I'm going to disrupt this market. I'm going to disrupt this big, heavy, traditional $50 billion well-established market. I'm going to inject tokenization into this. I'm going to inject blockchain into this, crypto economics into this, and I want you to advise me on that. What would be your natural reaction?
That's quite
let's not forget that you are a North American lawyer. So
I'm a North American, so we'll apply it from a North American sense. I would also maybe like to bring up how I would use Andy as a service provider if I was a litigation shop as well, because I find that extremely interesting, right? It's a clear problem where your rights and your access to justice has the barrier of the price of the lawyer.
Yeah.
But at the end, there's lawyers who don't want to take risk through contingencies. There's some lawyers that do, but there's a lot of lawyers, and it depends on the culture. In Canada, contingencies are not that big except in personal injury, and you have an ability for people to assess risk, right, which is what it is, and make risk assessments and gain rewards from that for a win-win-win situation. I find it very fascinating. So chapeau to Andy there. On the regulatory side, I think what it really boils down to, and it's funny because I literally just finished this call as well, literally boils down to, do you want to do an offering onshore or offshore, right? That's kind of really the first step of understanding. And that really is contextual based upon a lot of things, right? The risk appetite of the client. What is their funding goals and their token goals, who are their partners and stuff like that, and what are the resources that they have. Because they can't necessarily just have the ability to do an offshore offering without the proper resources in place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think kind of it boils down, that's kind of really the first thing to consider. So if you want to do an offshore offering, right, it's really going through the already set regulatory paths regarding doing an offshore offering, right? For the US audiences, this would be maybe doing a Reg CF offering or a Reg A offering or a Reg D offering, right?
Mm-hmm.
From a Canadian standpoint, we have extremely similar types of offerings, but they have fancy numbers that associate to the regulatory offerings as well. And those come with their positives and negatives. And maybe from your context, you wouldn't be able to do them, right? So that's kind of the first and foremost that is really important. And the offshore offerings are where a lot of people go, but a lot of people trip up on offshore offerings because they miss kind of a lot of really, really easy stuff. And there's a lot of bad advice out there, which is kind of hard to decipher, right? There's a lot of lawyers, I hope there's no lawyers from the Caribbean here, but I'm going to shit on you for a second. So there's a lot of...
But that's very interesting. It's actually it's actually the next question I wanted to ask you. I mean, the extension of that was give us maybe some basic mistakes that you've seen in this industry, especially in relation to young projects, startup projects. I mean, folks who clearly don't know what they're doing, and things that you have seen along the way with your experience.
So I think it's very simply, this will be kind of, if I wanted to title this as "This Idea Must Die," this is the idea: is that
must die.
That just because you incorporate a company offshore does not mean that that North American regulations don't apply to you, right?
Yeah.
That's folks think that, I'll incorporate a company in XYZ, insert island nation here, right? And they think that by doing so it absolves them of any regulatory obligation in their home country in North America. This is false and has to die immediately as a concept. So for anyone who's doing that, just FYI.
Probably a good advice.
Andy, is that something that rings a bell to you in terms of the strategic thinking and the thinking process you have gone through with Liti?
I think that was a starting point, but then at some point, we decided to go for a European country. We checked between Switzerland, Malta, Luxembourg, all these blockchain/crypto friendly jurisdictions. And then ultimately we decided to go for Switzerland. That is a little bit more expensive, but Switzerland is a country that compiles a number of advantages. First of all, this is a very politically stable country. So we take years to adopt laws. But once we open the door to, let's say, DLT laws and blockchain-friendly environments, we keep the cap, right? We keep the path open for the years to come. And I think this is important for investors that invest, for example, in Liti Capital, because Switzerland is definitely going to stay, in my opinion, a blockchain-friendly country. And the second aspect was that we wanted to play by the book. We wanted to be fully compliant, just to take a step back with some other like shady crypto project, because at the end of the day, we are not like a classic crypto project. We are more like a classic litigation finance firm, like a real company. And we have tokenized the equity in the company, right, to give an exposure to this amazing litigation asset class. And maybe we can talk about that later on. So that's a totally different approach here. We are all fully trying to be compliant and fully trying to be transparent in the way we process things. So that's we take that as an advantage over the competition, because we have nothing to hide, basically, right? And it's better for a litigation finance company not to have any legal issues, right? It will be detrimental to your credibility. So the question for us from the legal standpoint was that we have elements in our project that involves tokenomics, like the tokenization of the equity or the share of the company, and we had elements from the litigation finance perspective. So on the Swiss law, are we eligible to, or are we bound to some kind of licensing? And so when you have a startup, if I could give an advice, is you always want to be fully compliant to avoid any problems down the road, but you want to have a lot of flexibility, and you don't want to block cash to get licenses, extremely costly licenses, right from the start. So you have to structure the way your tokenomics works to keep that level of flexibility while being compliant. And that's that's why we did this with one of the largest law firms in Switzerland, because it's quite complex, actually.
Yeah. Okay. So this is where we should probably have a little bit of update from Toufic about what is going on in the US. I mean, I'm not a US lawyer. There are a lot of folks on this forum today who are obviously reading. I mean, we all read and eat and breathe crypto every day, and we all heard about or saw this those series of auditions recently at the US Senate, was it? So we all have seen those discussions. So can you please, and I know it's not an easy exercise, a few minutes on where we are and what is that all about, and then we will move back to Andy and dig deeper into what Liti is actually.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would love to hear more about Andy, because when he said that he's essentially tokenizing the financing part of the litigation, I think my mind was almost blown. It sounds like you've taken almost like an ILS model and implemented there. So that's was very fascinating. So again, I think in the US we have an ability for, first, Congress is trying to understand what the hell's going on, and is trying to truly kind of get to the bottom of something that they don't fundamentally understand, right? And I think this is really very key to kind of raise, because I've also experienced something that we may think is quite obvious to us, but is extremely hard to conceptualize for some other people, even especially folks that are a bit removed from the concepts that we deal with on a day-to-day. I think one of the main things that came out, obviously, which was the presidential working group on stablecoins, regarding that, essentially recommending that stablecoins be regulated in the United States, right? And I think this was a huge kind of move, so to speak, because essentially stablecoins have a lot of problems that they're dealing with from a regulatory standpoint. Number one, what the president's working group is stating, what he wants Congress to move on, is that they want essentially stablecoins to be considered, insured federal depository institutions, right? Mm-hmm. So that type of institution is going to resemble something much more of like a bank or some sort of credit union, rather than what it is now. And what they're looking to do is essentially apply these rules to them, because they're very worried about the amount of traffic that's happening on stablecoins, right? And the amount of traffic that's happening on stablecoin creates a higher propensity for a variety of different risk factors. Number one, there's a risk factor on the underlying assets, which sometimes are not backed one-to-one, not audited, and we don't have any verifications of the fact that they're there. Number two, there are risk factors around kind of payment and settlement risk, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think also exists in fiat and regular institutions. But like I always say, when it comes to crypto, it's much worse, so to speak. And secondly, and thirdly, I think, actually, no, I got two more things to say on this. So there's also the AML, I would say AML KYC kind of obligations in which they want to put upon issuers of token funders. This is kind of also reiterated in the FATF recommendations that they had put forward on this subject. And lastly, which I think is the more interesting one, is that they've also raised kind of questions about antitrust or anti-competition with respect to the business models of these stable coins. And this is one that I found extremely fascinating, because it's one that no one really is talking about, right? Because essentially the business model of the stable coins is that they are able to control the rails in which people have access to certain assets, right? And in doing so, they're essentially potentially going through and engaging in anti-competitive behavior, right? If the business model of Tether, which is not altruistic, it is done for a financial gain, right, is to essentially be kind of the liquidity providers of the crypto world, then you essentially have a potential antitrust case there in the US and an anti-competition one here in Canada. And I think that's where, depending on how the regulators move, we're going to see some interesting regulations come about. Tether's already pulling out of the US, if not already pulled out, and I think USDC has already received a action notice from the SEC as well.
Correct.
They've empowered the CRTC and the SEC to essentially enforce the stablecoin. So they're very, very worried. From a theoretical standpoint as well, one may pontificate that they're worried about the monopoly of greenback and stuff like that. But I'll save that for the after hours conversation.
No, it's really fascinating. Thank you for that. And obviously, I mean, as you can imagine, the entire world is following the developments in the US. So even if you have you don't have a foot in the US, either you're following it because you want to stay away from it. So we see a lot of projects in Asia who are doing everything they can to avoid any exposure directly or indirectly to the US, considering the extensive understanding of and the extraterritoriality by nature of the
but I will say a lot of the stuff that they're dealing with is going to be global, right? Like the concept of building KYC AML in DeFi, right, is a global issue, right, that many regulators are thinking about and considering, including European and Asian ones, right? Yeah. And what we're seeing is that the onus is going to be on the developers, right? And this is a big one. The onus will be on the developers of the DEXs or the DAOs, right? And except in certain instances where you develop for someone else to control and operate, right? But most of the time, those are unified positions that they have to build in those frameworks within the application themselves, and the onus is on them. So yeah, the US is obviously talking about that, but this is a global issue as well. Yeah,
a global conversation, absolutely.
For sure, yeah.
Andy, Liti Capital is actually regulated by the FINMA. Can you tell us a little bit about the process, your approval process with FINMA? Were you guys the first one? How did they look at you, especially as you were requiring to be regulated on something as sensitive or as disruptive as litigation finance on the blockchain? Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, sure. So I've started before by saying that there is an element of tokenization, there is an element of litigation finance, and so the way we structured the project really was dependent on having the least amount of licensing requirements, right? To operate as a startup, because again, you don't have much money to start with, and you want to put that money to develop your project, basically. So the way we did it is And I would advise to do that to any other project, is to go to a competent law firm and to ask for advice, because that actually, you come with an idea and then you have to shape it in a way that makes it compliant with the current status of the law that is changing, right? So what we did now is maybe not the correct thing to do. I mean, what we did 1 year ago is probably not the correct thing or the gold standard right now, because things are evolving very quickly in this space. So once we submitted this document to FINMA with this council from the corporate and fintech law firm, we just had a few back and forth with them. They had some questions and ask clarifications. But as I said, the legal ground was made in Switzerland such in a way that it was kind of easy to get. It was just taking forever to get the reply from FINMA, because they were like having a lot of different projects, and it was even the beginning of the COVID, so they had lots of submissions at this time. And so that's the process in a nutshell. It took maybe with the first idea, the creation of the project, the first structure, and then the change in the structure through the legal counsel. It basically took perhaps 1 year to finalize it and to have the non-action letter from FINMA that was like, yes, we can go ahead with that and start our activity, right?
So it's funny that you bring that up, because that's, I would say the most exciting and value-adding part of our job really is, we have founders that come to us with kind of concepts and ideas, or maybe even already, established businesses, and they say, this is what we want to do. How do we get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a regulatory fashion. And it's this, extremely interesting and exciting iterative process in which we kind of work with them and then work with the regulator in, subsequently to be able to, prepare them for that kind of regulated environment, and then, interlock with the regulator to as well convince them that, of our position and of our client, to have that trust kind of bestowed upon them through, a no action letter or any other type of regulatory decision.
Yeah, exactly. And just to follow up on that, for instance, you could have in litigation finance, you could tokenize the cases, right, which are the underlying assets. But at this point, it would become a security token, right? And that you have then to meet some standards according to the law. We decided for different reasons not to go that way. We tokenized the equity, that is the shares of Liti Capital, which gave us some legal freedom, and then which provide the exposure to the portfolio of cases, which is different, because then you remove the burden of being an expert in litigation finance, which probably 99.9% of the population is not, because that's really specific, right? And so just following your points, it's about having an idea and structure it in a way that makes you viable as a startup when you start the venture, right?
Yeah, and I think any founder here needs to have kind of strategic legal road mapping as well as part of your kind of general 5-year or 2-year strategic roadmap, right? Because obviously you guys can't come in and get full on ATS licensed, FINRA registered right off the bat. It's extremely expensive, and by the way, you don't know what you're doing, so they're not going to give it to you. And
exactly.
So
you won't get it anyway.
So, but you can start off within a limited framework, within maybe a lesser regulated framework, and then through the expansion of your business, you can then start growing into different types of market share, which would necessitate kind of an expanded regulatory oversight environment. So having that road mapping is extremely key, not only for your kind of well-being when you sleep at night, right? But also to kind of have the ability to build a successful company in the digital asset space, right? Because where folks, it's a huge risk that everyone endeavors in is the regulatory risk, right? And I know people hate talking about it because it's not exciting it's not mooning, it's not, it's not 100%.
No, but it's probably one of the only risks that can actually kill your company overnight. So
yes, because damage in terms of reputation are like one time, and then it's so hard that you cannot survive this. I believe it's really hard. Yeah.
So even having like some sort of consultation with kind of a competent law firm that knows what they're doing at the beginning can help you build that roadmap, right, down the line, so that you know what you need to do at what time and what is feasible within kind of the confines of your particular case. So it's very key point made by Andy.
Yeah. So basically, and Andy, let's talk a little bit more about what Liti actually is. I mean, I find this fascinating. I mean, litigation finance is not new, all right? Litigation finance has been around forever. It's I mean, according to estimations, it's a $50 billion industry, very well established. If I remember well, there are about 10 behemoth companies around the world who share this market. It's a huge market, and sometimes I feel like all those companies, which are huge, by the way, they actually do not want to be too much in the spotlight, because it's so convenient to be like just 10 companies. They all know each other, and they are just sitting on this massive industry. Liti Capital value proposition is to turn this into an investable asset that anybody could invest in. And just for people who don't know about litigation finance, it's actually the most profitable private equity-like return on the market. I mean, litigation finance funds usually return better profitability than most hedge funds on the market. So it's actually a very interesting industry. The difference being that obviously with blockchain and cryptocurrency, it's not accessible to anyone. Tell us a little bit more about the business, about who is investing into this, and what it consists of.
Yeah, sure. I think you did a pretty good pitch, by the way. We should probably try to hire you, Jean-Luc, as an advocate of the project. I
love it.
So Liti Capital, as I said, is a Swiss-based and registered company, active, as you said, in litigation finance. And litigation finance is the act of financing legal cases or legal claims on behalf of different clients. It could be individuals, it could be entities or companies that have suffered losses or damages. And the business model is pretty simple. So we finance the case, we take all the risk on us, right? We remove the financial burden from the client, and then we take a portion of the upside of the case as a business model, right? And so, as you said, these litigation finance assets, the moment we have this contract signed and we take a part ownership in different cases, they become assets of our company. And these assets, they have two very interesting properties. First one is that, as you mentioned, they provide return at the portfolio level that are ranging between 50 to 100% per year, which is absolutely insane returns, right? And then secondly, and I think this is the most interesting component for the litigation finance part, is that they are named or called counter-cyclical, meaning that they are not affected or very much immune to economic downturn. So if tomorrow the stock market would be collapsing, or the debt market would be collapsing, or even the crypto market would be collapsing, and maybe I can come to that in a minute, your assets will barely be affected by this, which is huge in a way. Now imagine a litigation finance company like ours that has a foot in the traditional space and one other foot in the crypto space, because we provide an equity token that enable people, everybody, the retail investors, the accredited investors, the institutional investors, to invest into litigation finance. That was the one best kept secret, even for accredited investors during the past decade, because it's so lucrative, as you said, Jean-Luc. Imagine now that our company is providing this exposure through its token to everybody, right? And the fact that it's the value proposition is actually extremely interesting even for traditional investors, because you get the exposure to the crypto uptrend, right? So over time, what has history told us? Since the inception of Bitcoin, and if you go back like one decade ago, you see that the market has a tendency to appreciate in value. That's the historical trend, right? You can have uptrend, downtrends down the road, but overall it is appreciating. Now imagine that our token is backed up by this amazing asset class that is litigation assets. So imagine now a catastrophic scenario where crypto goes to zero tomorrow, right? Because this is an extremely volatile market. I think this is why one of the reasons why Liti Capital is so powerful in terms of value proposition, because your investment will barely be affected by this. What I mean by that is that even if the token is worth zero, the company will still produce revenue and generate dividends for you, because we are holding the assets in the real or traditional world, right? So you will be able to profit from the token appreciation in value over time, as probably other crypto projects, and that is game changing for me, honestly.
Fantastic. I mean, you have to tell us about the Binance case, because that's absolutely fascinating, and I think this has contributed a lot to make Liti to make Liti's reputation on the market, even though it's just a 9-month-old company. Can you give us a super short summary of the Binance case in 1 minute?
Okay, 1 minute, sure. So the Binance case, I think it's one of the best PR case that we have, because usually we cannot talk really specifically in details about the different cases. There is an element of secrecy, but the Binance case is by definition public, right? So what happened is that over the past few months, and especially on May 19th, but on different occasions, as I said, traders and people having saved or provided their crypto savings on the Binance platform were suffering from an outrage from the Binance side, and they were losing all they had in just a matter of one night, right? So overnight they've lost a lot of money, and in total it's like probably a few hundreds of millions, if not more. So the fact is that even though Binance is the largest exchange in the world, they have no headquarters. So it's really, really difficult as an individual to have a claim against this company, because the only place you can apply is the Hong Kong Arbitration Court, and it will cost you individually 60,000 just to fill in the application form, right? Who is going to do that? Nobody. Would you do that if you have lost 20,000? Probably not, right? And this is just to set the very beginning of the legal process. So we are now, gathering these different claimants. Actually, a few thousands of claimants already joined the Binance claimants. So I can just, make here that we are here for claimants who have lost money in the case of Binance. And we are now representing and defending and providing the money for them to defend this case in the Hong Kong Arbitration Court. And I'm absolutely thrilled to see how many people have come to us already, and this is just continue to grow. So we need to bring more awareness, and just at the macro level, what we want to do is to position Liti Capital as a key entity among the stakeholders in the crypto industry. You have the traders, you have the exchanges, you have the regulators, the governments, and you need a credible entity with some legal expertise that can come into play and participate, even lead that conversation. I think it's really, really important. And I would say that in the case of Binance, it's probably a good thing for them to acknowledge that their own customer deserve a better treatment, and they should provide on overall in the crypto space more customer right and customer protection, because that's the only key to see mass adoption, right? Because if you open your wallet and you see that you have lost everything you have, your life savings just overnight, you are not going to go for the crypto environment because that's too risky, right? So we need collectively to bring and shape a better system for the consumer in this space.
Yeah, that you bring up a really good point about access to justice. I think this is something that, if you're looking for a positive, social, responsibly kind of company that is doing something that is, fundamental to the way in which our society functions, is something like Liddy Capital, which is giving essentially an ability for people to have, proper access to justice. And I think that's a very noble kind of cause to champion.
Yeah, thanks.
I want to specify something here. So basically, Liddy Capital is acting as a fund to go after to fund those cases. But obviously, you guys work with reputable law firm.
Absolutely.
And there is a principle of segregation or separation between the funding and the actual law firm, someone like Toufic, who would be actually in charge of the case. So basically, not being a funder or an investor in the case does not give you any right to influence the legal process. Those are two different, two separate avenues, and one does
exactly.
not influence.
And I think it's worth mentioning, Jean-Luc, in the line of what you were saying, that there is a dedicated steering committee for the Binance claim, and basically, this is why I'm not aware of the details of the case, because those guys are bound to secrecy. So even if we are funding the case, we don't know the details of the strategy around where they want to go with the case. That's really important to see, that there are different powers: those who funds, those who strategize around the case. Yes.
Fantastic. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. I would absolutely love to continue this conversation for another hour, but I guess it's time for us to wrap it up here. But yeah, I think it was an interesting conversation about the regulations and public policy, and also a good introduction about what litigation finance is. Such an interesting topic, and a very interesting application of a new disruptive technology to a very old established industry. I like that. Thank you very much. It was great. And Tali, back to you.